Che Guevara was the Jesus of South America. Jesus was the Che Guevara of Palestine. This sums up what liberation theology essentially is. Liberation theology is a heady mixture of Marxism and Christist theology. To understand liberation theology, what is the need? Why should we think about liberation theology? That is something that was used by the guerrilla groups, Marxist, Christian radicals, left-wing radicals in South America. Why should we talk about it? The answer is Stan Swamy. So, if we have to understand the worldview of Stan Swamy, if we have to understand how Stan Swamy looks at us, the non-Catholic Indians, then we have to understand what liberation theology is. In 1960s, in fact, starting from 1950s, after the Second World War, communism became a great attraction for the young minds. The youths were getting secularized and the youths were getting radicalized. The church found this very problematic. In fact, all Christian denominations found it very problematic. If a student gets a secular education, the student tends to become radicalized. So, along with this, in South America, the regimes that were extremely exploitative and oppressive. The peasants were suffering like anything under these regimes, and these regimes were ruling over vast Catholic populations. So these vast Catholic populations over which these regimes were ruling, they were protesting against the oppressive measures. Remember, if you are in a Catholic diocese, then all your life centers around the parish priest, around the bishop of the archdiocese. So, whether it is your marriage, whether it is your baptism, whether it is your death, whether it is your education, whether it is your healthcare, whether it is your employment opportunity, whether it is family planning or not family planning, the decision to make family planning or not, everything revolves around the priest, the church, the diocese. So the persons who were getting oppressed naturally were looking towards the Catholic diocese. There were people, there were churchmen who were sympathetic to the sufferings of the people. And they started using the pulpit to arouse the people against the oppressive regimes. So far, so good. But the problem was, particularly in the case of Argentina, let us say, the problem was you are having a Catholic regime and the Catholic regime was being oppressive. At the same time, the Catholic regime was giving a lot of state support to the church. The church was in a very privileged condition, in a privileged status. It was an organization that was respected by the state. So the church was in two minds, whether to oppose or whether to play along with the state. And predominantly, the church decided to play along with the state. At the same time, it also understood that the radicalized youths going out of the church and joining Marxist or Maoist resurgent groups, particularly the Marxist resurgent groups that were being supported by Soviet Union, Cuba, that would be very dangerous. That would mean a great exodus from the church. So this necessitated that at least some sections of the church, some denominations of the church, play it along with the radicals. And there were genuine people who felt for the sufferings and they took arms among the clergy. But there were a set of theologians who sat and who thought that a kind of compromise could be reached between Marxism and Christist theology. And very easily they arrived at this compromise. What was the compromise? Why it was possible? Because at the core, Marxism and Christianity share some common elements. These common elements were a vision of a totalitarian utopia, either theological or ideological. You always map all the problems in the society to a quintessential other and satanize that person, demonize that person, so that you can just crush that person. In fact, I am basically paraphrasing Che Guevara's statement that what you have to do with the radical youths or the guerrillas is that you have to make sure that the guerrilla doesn't feel, the radical leftist doesn't feel any humanity in the enemy. He sees the enemy as complete personification of evil that will maximize hatred, and that would be the way to do revolution. That is the teaching of Che Guevara. Now you may ask the question, we have always learned that Christianity is the religion of love. God is love and all that. Turn your cheek to the others and all that. Then how can your ideology of a person like Che Guevara can go along, a hate ideology can go along with the theology? The answer is that all these morals about showing the other cheek or forgiving your enemy, it all exists within the in-group. When it comes to the out-group, it is very clear, if it is a disbeliever, if a person is a disbeliever, then you have to chop his head off. No, it was not the later day prophet who said this. The later day prophet of, let us say, 7th century who said this. It was the only begotten Son of God who said this. So this particular aspect is already there. In fact, he said it even more effectively because he said it in the form of a parable. So this aspect is there in Christianity to ruthlessly destroy all kind of pluralism, to create a totalitarian utopia, and in that you can use all kinds of means. There is a famous saying, when an incident in history, there was this heresy against the mainstream Roman Catholic religion. It was called Cathar heresy. And a Dominican priest was fighting against this Cathar heresy people, and the people who were adhering to the Cathar heresy, they were held in a small town. Then the Catholic armies have surrounded it. Now, within this particular town, there were also believing Catholics as well as the Cathars. And the Dominican priest, he gave the order that you burn the entire town. Now, the military commander asked the bishop, the Dominican bishop, but there are Catholics inside, what do we do? And the bishop answered, burn them all down. When they go over there, the God will decide who is his people and who is his opponents. So that is the mindset of Catholic Church. There is an element of strong totalitarianism there. Today, if they don't run inquisitions, if they don't burn people at stake, the reason is not the want of will, it is the want of power. And here is communism, which is essentially in secular language, in secular framework, replicating whatever the medieval church was doing. And if you can find a common ground, if you can either mimic what the leftist radicals are doing, borrow their jargon and create a theology, a very secular looking theology, but deep inside of at its mimetic core, it is strongly a fundamentalist Christian theology. You create that theology, then it can be a great, powerful weapon in your hand. So they created the liberation theology. The liberation theology thus emerged in South America, and already these regimes, the oppressive regimes, justified all their inhuman atrocities in the name of fighting communism. They were telling that we are fighting against communism, and the people whom we were killing, the people whom we were torturing were all communists. So they were justifying all this, but they were exploiting the people like anything. And so liberation theology now has a very fertile ground. It already had the network. Remember this. This is very important. The communists would have to come and they would have to create a party network. They have to create a network of their party infrastructure, their guerrilla infrastructure and all that. But already the church has a ready network. A very minute fraction of that network was used to support the radicalized youths who are fighting these suppressive regimes. We have to understand this in complete totality. We have to understand their positives so that we will be able to understand their negatives more properly. There were certain bishops who were very strong, who fought for the peasants and they sacrificed their lives. One such person was, there was one Romero. This Romero was an archbishop who was El Salvador, of course. His name was Oscar Romero. And he was conducting a mass and he was shot dead by the dictators. These dictators were again supported by the United States. The United States, as you know, was basically white Protestant. They were Hispanic Catholic, and all these kind of ethnic and religious divides were also used in the framing of liberation theology. Now, this liberation theology found a lot of favor with the fencitors as well as the liberals in almost all West. So here you have something that is not communist, but at the same time it has all the charms of communism. And it is ultimately controlled by the Rome, and the Rome, Vatican, it has good cordial relations at the highest level with the Western powers. So in a way, these left radicals who are in South America or anywhere else can be ultimately controlled by the Western heads. So they can allow these radicals to go to a particular extent, have a catharsis, have a kind of a safety valve process, and they can always have the herds under their control. And if it comes to negotiating between the government and the radicals, the church will play a very important role. Thus, the church would regain the kind of medieval control it had over the populations using these secular Marxist jargons, which it has integrated with its very Christian theology. And it was finding very good press coverage everywhere. But there was a problem. The Pope John Paul II, who was from Poland, he had seen what actually a Marxist government could do to the church. It could do to the people, his own people. He was from Poland, he was Polish, and he had seen how the Marxist government there, supported by Soviet Union, has ruthlessly destroyed his people. He was vehemently anti-communist. So during his time, and he was also cooperating with the United States during the Cold War to throw out to kind of collapse the Soviet Union. His role is very great, particularly in Poland, becoming free from communists. Pope John Paul II played a very important role. And hence, now Pope John Paul II does not want this liberation theology to spread. He does not want the people, the powers that be in the West to perceive the church as kind of a left radical organization because of the liberation theology. So he said, okay, boys, do it in a soft way. Don't overdo it. So he said this. And what always the church does in this kind of circumstances is that it channelizes the liberation theology, it imports liberation theology to places where there are completely non-Catholic regimes, non-Catholic governments. These non-Catholic governments, the church may perceive as its enemies because those are the places where the church has to plant the cross. In fact, when Pope John Paul II came to India, he openly said that now in this millennium, we are going to plant the church in Asia. And when you tell Asia, you include basically two most populous countries. One is India and another one is China. In China, there is a great deal of evangelization going on. And because of that, there is an estimate that today China has more number of Christians. The total populations, there may be a small percentage, minority percentage, but the number of Christians in China is higher than the number of Christians in Europe. All this is relevant to our point, and we will come to that later. So, church has started having a significant presence in China. And it is also facing Maoist persecution there. And it is now it has reached that particular critical mass. It is one of the earlier stage critical masses. Then critical mass to negotiate with the Chinese government, with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, keep that aside. We come to India. In India, the liberation theology arrived in 70s itself. And here they combined the already existing discourse that the oppressive caste structures were created by the Brahminical forces, and these Brahminical forces are the Aryans who came here, and the entire caste segregation is essentially a racist apartheid, and in fact the longest surviving racist apartheid. And Indian government itself is Brahminical, and it exploits the tribals and the Dalits, the scheduled communities and the scheduled tribes. Now, this particular narrative is already there in India, and it was supported by, it was accepted as axiomatic by the communist movement, whether it is CPI, CPIM, CPIML, or independent radicals, or even you can call them proto-leftists like Ramachandra Guha, Madhav Gadgil, all these people, the entire intelligentsia that was created by the Nehruvian system, they had accepted as axiomatic that the Brahminical system is there in India, and it is exploitative, and it is oppressing the scheduled communities and scheduled tribes, and we have to fight against it. And what all this liberation theology had to do was connect this with the Indian state itself. How this operates? It operates at various levels, but overall, it creates some kind of a mental atmosphere where this is accepted. For example, take Arundhati Roy. Arundhati Roy considers herself or projects herself as a secular individual. She doesn't have institutional or even belief-based relations to Catholic Church. Remember this very clearly. We are not talking about conspiracy theory here. No, Arundhati Roy was not planned by the church, but her mental universe always gels with this particular aspect. So, if you look at one of her lectures, you would find that she says, once India got independent, the Indian army was employed against its own people, and she gives a list, and in that, if you look closely, you will find that the liberation of Goa by the Indian government is considered as employing Indian military against Indian Christians. How is that liberation of Goa from Portuguese becomes a military operation against India's own people? But she says this. We have to understand the mindset behind this. The mindset is that the Catholic rule, even in secular terms, is superior to Indian rule, purely in secular terms. But Catholic rule by Portuguese is superior to Indian rule, and the Indian rule there is a kind of an occupation. That is the mindset. Now, this is accepted by liberation theology. This is something that is integral in liberation theology. And they have a score to settle with India in terms of Portuguese. We made Portuguese go away. We may see all this in secular terms. In fact, Jawaharlal Nehru insisted that the problem between Portuguese and India in liberating Goa should not be seen in terms of religion, but the documentary evidence shows that the Catholic establishment in Goa was essentially sympathetic to Portuguese. That from a larger point of view, from the larger Christian worldview, we have to understand this, the Catholic worldview, we have to understand this. The Catholics came here and the pagans made them go back. That is something that shouldn't happen in their worldview. Because from paganism coming to Catholic religion is a great advancement, a great liberation, whereas making the Catholic regime go back from India, that is a kind of a discrepancy. So it is occupation. So it is negative. You have to fight against this. And this will not resonate with even Indian Christians. They would say this is nonsense. So what you do, you take already that is there, something is there that has been accepted, that has been internalized by many of the intelligentsia, and project your holy war through that. That is liberation theology. What is happening is crusade. And the crusade is camouflaged in the Marxist jargon and given. So even already we know that the Indian press has been sold over mostly to KGB. KGB had a model penetration in making the entire Indian press play to its tune. So the Indian press is already leftist. So the leftist Indian press found this wonderful. If you go through entire Indian literature, except for the Sangh Parivar, the RSS, or the Hindutva related literature, except for that, you will find always liberation theology praised in glowing terms by the Indian press and Indian intelligentsia. So this creates a wonderful atmosphere for the liberation theologians in India to operate without creating problems for the grand narrative of the church with respect to the West, without creating problem for the relations of the papal state, the West. So in India, Marxist radicalism facilitated by church. The church becomes the turnkey agency for Marxist radicalism. It is okay. It is absolutely fine with respect to India. That is how the whole thing has to be seen. Now, Stan Swamy comes and he uses this framework to study some very real serious problems. What are the real serious problems? In the development process that started, there was a shift in this development process that started with the colonization of India. And this development process was not all inclusive. The colonial development process was not all inclusive. It left out significant portions of our communities, our tribal communities, and our fellow communities who were fighting against the British. Whoever the British saw as their enemies, as problematic, as dangerous, they were called criminal tribes and criminal castes. They became scheduled tribes and scheduled communities. Of course, there were also other internal dynamics that also created the social exclusion. And the colonial development process concretized this and made them not take they were never given their share of power in the development process. So they became marginalized communities. When the Indian state came, it should have actually rectified this. But already the Indian state was having a wrong framework, blaming this process, this marginalization, which is because of colonialism, on the so-called mythical Brahminism. So the Indian state and the Indian anthropologists, the Indian social institutions could not actually actively address this particular problem of marginalized communities. The marginalized communities again and again became targets of exploitation by the state, by the vested interests in the secular polity. Remember this, the secular polity actually deepened the divisions that were created by, that were even deepened by the colonial development process. They continued it without applying a balm to heal these divisions. And this is a very fertile ground for the liberation theologians to move in. And they said to the tribal communities, your problem is because, see, the non-tribal community is within single inverted quote, caste Hindu. You people are without caste, those people are with caste, and it is this that even if you are getting absorbed into Hinduism, you will be absorbed into the caste hierarchy. Go through the writings of Arundhati Roy, go through the speeches of Stan Swamy, you will find this resonance. So the Hinduization of tribals was started. Remember, this Hinduization of tribals is basically a colonial concept. In our traditional way of looking at the tribal communities, which does not differentiate between the tribal and the non-tribal, they form a continuum. They are not two categories. So here, whether it is Veer Savarkar or whether it is Mahatma Gandhi, they converge in this particular point. They consider tribal as Hindus. Hinduism itself was indebted to tribal spiritual streams, and in fact, Hinduism and the tribal spiritual streams cannot be separated at all. If you are going to create a separation, it is going to be an artificial separation. And once you create an artificial separation, it will create a lot of negative effects in the society. And unfortunately, the Nehruvian state and then the state, the governments that came after that, just up to the present government, they all worked within this particular paradigm. And this paradigm created a very fertile ground for breeding of liberation theology, Maoist theology, mosquitoes. So in India, the liberation theology occurred a new element. That element was the other, the exploitative other became the Brahminical system, the so-called Brahminical system. Then this Brahminical system was also having in its control the Indian state. So now the Indian state become the quintessential evil that has to be fought against. Okay. Were they able to bring any justice for the tribal communities through this? No. They brought a lot of violence on both sides. The armed forces of Indian state, the central forces of Indian state, the state police forces, they were people, ordinary people like you and me. They were there. They were good fathers, good sons, and they were there working for the Indian state, for its safety. And there are these tribals. The tribals, they were thinking that they were being oppressed. It was real oppressive. And they thought that it is this entire non-tribal Indian state that was in the Indian communities that are oppressing them. So they got infested with the Che Guevara virus that says that your enemy is not human, you have to fight them. And here is Stan Swamy and others who say that your enemy is essentially satanic. They don't say it openly, but that is what they mean. So here we have a system through which you can create armed, chaotic anarchies in the heartland of India, anywhere they choose. Wherever they gain dominance, they can enact this. Whether it is Kudangulam, whether it is Thuthukudi, whether it is Uttarakhand, they can do this. The so-called the Red Corridor, they can do this. Now, think of this in a global context. Let us consider a scenario. The Catholic Church, the highest echelons of the Catholic Church, they want to negotiate with the Politburo of Communist Party of China, Chinese Communist Party. And the Communist Party of China says, see, we can give you this concessions. For that, you have to use your liberation theologians in India to create constraints for India in its present development run. Then you have agitation that closes an important industrial plant and that makes India within a year an importer of copper. See, this is how the liberation theology can play mischief. And to understand this liberation theology and the consequences we have to know, we have to analyze this from a Hindu point of view. For this, we can take the help of the Jewish scholars. By taking the help of Jewish scholars, I don't mean in institutional relation. If it happens, it is good. But see the way they have studied liberation theology, how they have brought out how anti-Semitism is there, the heart of liberation theology. They have done a wonderful job. That has been today, yes, that has created a strong criticism of liberation theology. In the West, anti-Semitism is a big taboo. In the sense, if you are identified as an anti-Semite, then your career would be end. Whether it is your academic career, whether it is your business firm, it would end. But even in such a situation, the Vatican was able to pressurize the Israeli government to release from prison an archbishop. His name was Hilarion Kapuki. He was arrested for gun running. He is part of this liberation theology mindset, which identified Jews as the oppressors. And it was purely anti-Semitism. He wanted Israel not to exist in a way, and he was supporting the Palestinian terrorists. And he was arrested in 1970, it should be around 1974. Yeah, he was arrested in 1974, and the Israeli court sentenced him to 12 years imprisonment. The church, the Vatican, pressurized Israeli government to release him after 4 years. So we have to understand what kind of forces we are up against, and we have to make sure that we understand them properly. We present our criticism of liberation theology properly. Liberation theology is essentially and entirely deep colonialism. They want to make sure that the non-Catholic Indian state, an Indian state that is predominantly pagan, however secular it may be, still it is considered pagan. Remember this. So this government, this particular government, but it has to be stopped. It has to be demonized. And to do this, they would now use the death of Stan Swamy. And the entire left media, when it comes to India, they would embrace liberation theology like anything, as if it is the panacea for all the problems of developing countries. But the real root of the problem was the colonization and still the divisions that were created by colonization. So how do we counter this? Government of India can do one thing. Look at the way Stan Swamy was silent over a lot of things. If he was really a person who was pursuing justice, he should have talked about that. I will take one thing and I will show you. That is, the church has been campaigning for the same concessions and reservations and affirmative program benefits that are available for the Hindu scheduled community persons to convert a scheduled community person. Okay. If you are a neutral observer, it might look to you as if it is a very justified stand. What is wrong? The suffering Dalit gets converted to Christianity. So because of that, he should be denied of all the government benefits that his fellow Dalit is getting because he is a Hindu. Isn't that religious apartheid? So that is the mindset that he doesn't have. But remember that these people said that the marketing line of these people was that if you become a Catholic, there is no caste. So they were giving a false promise. Next, take the Catholic institutions in India. It is a big network. In fact, according to some studies, after Indian Railways, the Catholic Church is the largest landowner in India. So they have a big network, vast network of institutions, and many of their education institutions are government aided. So a proper thing to do would be to give the converted Dalits reservations in Catholic institutions first. The same kind of reservations that the government of India is giving in its secular institutions, the Catholic institutions should give in their job opportunities. in their student admissions. That is what they have to do. So what the Narendra Modi government should do to counter this particular undead life of Stan Swamy be to come out with a white paper on whether the Catholic Church, or for that matter, the diocese of all denominations in India, any denomination in India, are they implementing the affirmative program that the government of India is implementing for scheduled communities in their own institutions. If they are not doing it, why? They are getting the government aid, but they are exempting themselves, but they are demanding that their converted be given place in Indian state-run institutions. The government should come out with a paper of this. And also, the government can and should announce the famous nun Abhaya as the martyr. As a martyr of Indian Catholic people who were victimized by a patriarchal colonial church. So they have to do this. To counter this, they have to do these two things. Essentially, these are just two things. There are a lot of things they can do. They have to do these two things so that the church would be shown that two can play the same game. The aim of this particular video ultimately is to make you get interested in liberation theology and study what actually is it. What are its strengths? What are all the traps that it can lay for our people, and how we can counter them. To do that, we have to make a very critical study of liberation theology from the point of view of Hindu historiography. Thank you.